Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, September 13th, and this is going to be our training on different contracts and zip forms and how to use them, how to go over them, and how to explain them to your buyers and sellers. So, we're going to start by logging into ZipForm. You should, when you joined Romeo Team Realty, you should have gotten an email with a new username for the brokerage account of ZipformPlus. The reason this is important is because all of the company templates are going to be saved in there. So you never need to ask, hey, Tori, what documents do I need for XYZ? The first time you log in, it should be your full first name dot your full last name, and then hit forgot password to get the link sent to your email and create your login password. We can go over another time. Just ask me individually how to import, if you are coming from another company, all of your old transactions. So it's all within your ZipformPlus account and you don't need to worry about losing anything. Okay, so we're going to sign in. And we'll go to probably the first thing we'll do is, if you're in here, you're going to be in here for a reason, right? You're going to have a different transaction that you're ready to get signed. So let's start with the one that most people will be starting with, which is a purchase contract. Okay, we have a buyer and that buyer is ready to put in an offer on something. So to create the transaction in ZipForm, and ZipForm is the program that we use so that when we send somebody a contract, everything is printed. I prefer not to have handwritten contracts. That way I never have to worry about reading somebody's handwriting. You don't have to worry about whether or not you have messy handwriting. Attorneys prefer printed contracts and typed contracts, and we are in the 21st century. We really should be typing everything if at all possible. Obviously, if you're on the road, don't expect to be putting in an offer and the buyer says, yes, let's go. A handwritten contract is fine. You may want to consider typing it up, though, when you get a meeting of the minds. So to create a new one, go to the little button that says new. Okay, what type is it? It's going to be a new purchase or offer. You're going to name it. So we're going to name this. I usually name my transactions by the client name. So we're going to call this Joe, John, and Jane. Okay. Residential. We only do residential here, so really that should always be residential. And then you're going to select your template. So the company has templates all here. So you never need to worry about what type or what documents need to be where. Buyer documents are for if you're taking on an exclusive buyer's agency agreement, that's what buyer documents are. Otherwise, you're going to have a conventional purchase contract or an FHA purchase contract. We will also go over the VA addendum. So you can either use, the easier one to use would be the conventional purchase contract and then add the VA addendum in. So let's start with a conventional purchase contract. I'm going to save. And it's going to create that transaction for you. This is the mobile version of ZipformPlus. A lot of browsers or a lot of computers now will be showing you the mobile version of ZipformPlus. It might look slightly different if you are on a true desktop. But everything should roughly be the same. But you're going to go into documents. And there's two things in the conventional purchase contract, okay? There's going to be the agency disclosure, which if we're all doing our jobs correctly, the first time, unless the buyer wants to put an offer in the first day that you meet them, you should already have the agency disclosure filled out and signed. But just in case, that is here. So let's go over that quickly. And what I'm going to do is when we go over each of these and how to fill them out, feel free to write in on your, for the people that are sitting here, you have printouts. Feel free to write in each of the printouts what goes where. And I'm going to go through my scripts and explain to you exactly as I would explain to a buyer or a seller what these documents are. Okay, so this is your New York State agency disclosure. Okay, and going through what should be typed here. I have these pre-filled out. You are welcome to fill them out for you. If the global template, has anybody looked at this? Does the global template pre-populate my name? Yeah. Okay, so you'll have to change that or I can change that so that it doesn't pre-populate that, but you'll obviously want to put your name. So, if it's Jennifer Yetter, okay, it'll be your name. It'll be the company name. So that will always say Romeo Team Realty. Okay. And then we're going to assume that you're working with a buyer, right? Because we're putting in an offer. So you're going to check buyer as a buyer's agent. Okay. You can also check advanced informed consent to dual agency or advanced informed consent to dual agency with designated sales agents. We'll go over that in a minute. But generally, if you're putting in an offer on somebody else's listing from outside the company, which is going to be probably 99 times out of 100, it should be just buyer as a buyer's agent. Down here, this will be the buyer's full names printed. So Jane and John Doe. And then you can fill these in down here. Jane Doe, John Doe, and you can fill in the date that they signed or that you're going to be signing, or you can just wait for them to handwrite those in. If you're going to be going over this in person, or if you're going to be sending this through DocuSign, you can just have the DocuSign dates go in there so it coincides with the date that they actually signed it. Okay, and so going over the New York State agency disclosure, what I always tell people is, first off, this is not a contract. It says in big bold letters right at the top, this is not a contract. This has nothing to do with commission or getting paid. This is a consumer protection document. New York State wants to make sure that you know who I represent. On this particular property, I am not the listing agent, okay? So by law, I have to deal honestly and fairly with everybody, and I must disclose all material defects. So even if I did represent the seller, if I knew the roof was leaking, I would have to disclose that to you as a buyer. If I represented you as a buyer and I knew that you were bankrupt, had no ability to purchase, I would have to disclose that to the seller. So really, this is a directive of who do I owe confidentiality, loyalty, obedience, and duty to account. Obviously, in this situation, you'd want me to owe that to you, which is why we've checked it off as a buyer's agent, so that you're telling me to hold your information confidential, and I'm not going to share that or betray your trust with the seller. I'm here to work in your best interests. Okay? Generally, that's enough, and most people get it. If they want to read through it, they can. There is absolutely no mention of commission in this document because it has nothing to do with commission. So if they ask about that, how do you get paid? You can say, and I tell people this is a gentleman's agreement between you and I. If we're going to continue to work together, if I'm going to continue to show homes, all I ask is that you only work with me. If you don't like me, if you hate me, never want to see me again, I'm the worst realtor you've ever met, you can go work with somebody else. Just please do me the courtesy of telling me so that neither of us waste our times. Again, most people are going to have no problem with that. If they do not want to sign this, I don't think we're going to be getting to an offer stage and they're not going to want to sign it. But if you're presenting it to somebody for the very first time, the first time you meet a cold lead, if they don't want to sign it, generally I take notes on the bottom of it and say, customer refused to sign. Or we can change the check boxes to I represent the seller as a seller's agent, or the seller as a broker's agent would be more likely if you have no actual fiduciary relationship with the seller. And perhaps they will sign that because then it's indicating that you represent the seller, and then just remember who you represent. Agency could be an entire course, so we can go over this another time. But in general, that's how I explain the New York State agency disclosure to a buyer. And if you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on what goes where? This one should be pretty straightforward. I really hope that you've all seen this before. Okay. So the other form is the purchase contract. Okay. So in the purchase contract, I have certain things that are pretty much always filled out. Does everybody have the purchase contract? If you're following along at home in front of you, you don't have a purchase contract in there?
I have a right to rent. Listing agreement.
All right, we're back. So on to the purchase contract. I will go through each paragraph and explain to you what I explain to a buyer and seller after I go through and tell you what goes in each blank. Okay? So paragraph 1 should be pretty self-explanatory, right? We're entering the seller's full name and the address that they reside at, which is 9 times out of 10 the property that you're set to purchase, the property address. Where do you get the seller's name and information, might you ask? You can go into, obviously, Paragon, and let's pull up my listings right now, 36 Hathorn. So you can go into the listing, because usually when you're typing up a purchase contract, you'll have the listing in front of you, right? So you can do one of two things. Sometimes the agent, I always just put the last name because I hate putting everybody's full name there. And usually if you can't see, you can go into the tax record, which is that little button there.
Which one is it?
Right underneath the photo in the listing, the yellow button with the black New York looking thing. I actually think it's a county, but it doesn't matter.
It does sort of resemble the state.
So that's the tax report for that particular property. The other surefire way, if the agent has uploaded everything to Paragon, is to look at the disclosures. So property condition, or the tax record, school tax bills, but the disclosures right at the top should have the seller's name and current address. If you go into the tax record, right underneath the map, it'll say the current owner's name. Sometimes this can get a little confusing because of the formatting. In this particular circumstance, the buyer and the two sellers, have two different last names. And sometimes it's hard to tell whose name goes with what. So that's not always the easiest way, which is why the best way is to look at the disclosures and get the seller's information. If you don't have it, you can leave it blank, but we really should be filling out some sort of a seller's name when we send over an offer. Okay? Purchaser's name, obviously the purchaser's full name, or if they're using an LLC or an entity to purchase, that goes there in paragraph 1B, and the address that either the purchaser currently resides at, or again, if it's an LLC, wherever the address of the business entity is. Paragraph 2, property to be sold, the address goes into that first blank. Okay, so if it's 36 Hathorn Boulevard, we're writing 36 Hathorn Boulevard, right? But that should be the property address that we're offering on. The offer address. Or the offer property address, okay? In the town of, what town does the property reside in? This particular one would be Saratoga Springs. So what's the town? In the county of Saratoga. So if this were 36 Hathorn, if we were filling it out like that, Amanda and Christian, they're going to be famous now. Okay, so it would be Saratoga Springs. In the county of Saratoga. Okay. In describing the lot, we're saying it's as per deed. I never want anything in that line other than as per deed. Those 3 words. No lot dimensions, no numbers, no acreage size, as per deed. Okay, we'll go over why when I go through the explanation of each paragraph, okay? Then paragraph 3, this is where we're going to put the appliances that go with the property. To be safe, I always go straight back into the listing. I literally copy and paste from the listing straight into this paragraph, okay? Now, some will not include the washer and dryer, but your buyer may want to throw in the washer and dryer, see what they can get. You can add washer and dryer there. If there's a dehumidifier in the basement, dehumidifier. There's a pool on the property, pool pump and all accessories. Okay, if you can throw in here as well shed. If there's a shed on the property, you can throw in, it really just obviously depends on what's at the property, right? Other things that are typically here, hot tub. There's a hot tub going with the property. So all those things will go there. So for our purposes right now, these are the appliances that go with it. And then we're also going to add in the words on every contract: as placed and in working condition on closing. Okay? As placed and in working condition on closing. Paragraph 4, items excluded from the sale should pretty much always say all personal property, unless the seller has listed somewhere in the listing, or you happen to know because the listing agent told you, hey, we're excluding a chandelier. Okay, you can put all personal property, including dining room chandelier. Okay, but typically all personal property. Purchase price. We're going to go through a couple different scenarios here because there are a couple different things that you may come across. If we're in a typical conventional purchase contract, the buyer has enough for closing, has enough to bring to closing to cover all of their closing costs and taxes, down payment, all that. If we're offering, this property was listed for $225,000. If we're offering $220,000, you just write in $220,000. What's the earnest money deposit? I do not put it in paragraph A. There's a reason. We'll go through that in a second. I put it in paragraph B. And we should always be doing about 1% of the purchase price, okay? You can round it. So at $220,000, it's okay to have a $2,000 deposit. It's okay to have a $1,000 deposit. It just looks better, and it's expected to be about 1% of the purchase price. You can do $2,500 if you so wish. You can do more if they're really serious. This line now in zip form, if a date comes up or it's a number formatted blank, to get around that, hit the space bar. It'll highlight green, and then you can type in anything you want. Okay, little trick. So what we do is we do the deposit in paragraph B, additional deposit on acceptance. Reason being, technically, if we wrote it here, deposit with this contract, you should be hand delivering a check the moment you present that offer. I don't want to hand deliver a check until somebody accepts our offer. I don't want to put it in the mail until somebody accepts our offer. So the way we get around that is we write additional deposit on acceptance. And that's why we use paragraph B, okay? Paragraph C is going to be the difference between the purchase price and the deposit. So it would be $218,000 in this case. All right. The paragraph 6, we're going to go through this whole thing, and then we'll go through a couple of different scenarios. Okay, guys? It's going to be a conventional purchase. This is a conventional purchase contract, right? Mortgage loan of. This is where you need to know what your buyer is putting down. Okay, are they putting down a 5%, 10%, 20% down loan? They're putting down a flat $100,000 no matter what they purchase in this price range. You need to know that information from your buyer. So let's say they're doing a 5% down conventional. Okay, so $220,000 is your purchase price. Here, I can use the calculator on the screen so y'all can see that. $220,000 purchase price. And then to get the mortgage amount, you're going to take out your 5%. So you multiply it by 0.95, right? So 95% of that number is 209. That's what would go in that blank for a $220,000 purchase price with a 5% down loan. If you were to do a 10% down, obviously multiply 220 by 0.9, so on and so forth. If you don't want to do that kind of math, you can always do 220 times 0.05 to figure out what their down payment would be and do subtraction that way, so it's a $11,000 down payment. But the easiest one is definitely do your 0.95. Okay? So that's what would go in that blank. That is the mortgage amount. To calculate that, you take the purchase price, the total purchase price, which will become important in the next scenario we go over, the total purchase price minus your down payment, whatever percentage or dollar amount that is. for a term of not more than. Now this is the amortization schedule, right? Are they doing a 30-year loan, which most of the people in our area are doing a 30-year loan. So 30 would go in that blank. Maybe they're extremely financially savvy buyers. They only want to do a 15-year mortgage. Okay. 15 would go in that blank. Most people are going to do 30, but whatever purchase price they're doing, or sorry, whatever mortgage length they're doing goes in that blank. At an initial fixed or adjustable rate, most mortgages in this day and age are going to be a fixed rate. Okay. However, a lot of buyers are doing a 10-1 arm, a 5-1 arm, 7-1 arm, which means that the rate is fixed for 10 years. If it's a 10-1 arm, after that, it becomes variable. Okay. So that could be considered an adjustable rate mortgage, and you can check the adjustable button. But most of the time, you're going to be checking the fixed button. Okay. Nominal interest rate not to exceed. This is where we use that little space bar again. I do not want you ever writing a percentage amount in there. It is space bar, prevail. Okay. Whatever the prevailing rate of the day is. That way, we don't change the contract if rates jump. Okay. Or drop. These are always written in, both brokers and both attorneys, so you don't need to worry about those. And this date down here is going to be your mortgage commitment date. Okay. How do you know what the mortgage commitment date is? You have to know what's going on in your market, right? Right now, a conventional loan is taking, on average, about 4 to 6 weeks to close. So I usually write the mortgage commitment date out for about 5 weeks, okay? If we assume we're closing in a standard 6-week timeline, we should have full mortgage commitment, which that mortgage commitment date should include the date by which the appraisal is done. Because you want full mortgage commitment. You don't want a mortgage commitment condition upon appraisal. That's not a real mortgage commitment. That's a fake mortgage commitment. Okay, you have to have the appraisal, otherwise it's not considered full mortgage commitment. So typically that will happen at the latest a week before closing. So I usually write that date out for 5 weeks. If you have a buyer that maybe needs to sell their house or they want a little bit of extra time, basically what I write, and then you want to do a 6-week or an 8-week closing, something like that. The general rule of thumb is I would write that date out about a week before the projected closing date, just to be safe. A standard buyer that is bringing all their closing costs, this is always a little sensitive, so I'm sorry about that. What you can do if there's no seller contribution, sometimes it's easier to go backwards. You can highlight this, I swear, there we go. Highlight this, and then in zip form, you can go up, the more button, strike out. And you can strike that whole paragraph out. Okay, so if there is no seller contribution, use the strikeout button. It's much cleaner. You can also put NA in those blanks, but it looks much nicer to have a struck paragraph instead. Okay, to undo it, just go back up and strike out. Okay, this is a typical scenario where somebody's brought all their closing costs. However, many of us work with first-time home buyers. Many of us know that that's not your standard procedure or your given procedure. So say these people want to offer $220,000 and they're doing a 5% down conventional, but they'd like to do a 3% seller concession. Okay, so and this would also work for an FHA loan. The numbers, the formulas are all the same. You just plug in the amount of concession, right? So we can go through that right now. Say they're doing a conventional loan with 5% down, and they're allowed a 3% seller concession, which the buyer would like to do. Okay. They want to offer the seller $220,000, but they want to roll their closing costs into that on top of that. Okay. So how do we calculate that? A little bit of algebra. Okay. $220,000 is what we're offering to the seller. A 3% seller concession would mean that is going to be that number, that net to seller is going to be 97% of the purchase price, right? Because 100% of the purchase price minus a 3% seller concession, because that number, which can get confusing, so if you get confused, come and talk to me. But that number is always off of the purchase price, not the net to seller. A lot of people get that confused. Okay, so it's not 3% of 220,000. It's 3% of the total purchase price, which would include that concession. Some attorneys don't even always understand that.
Can you say that one more time? Sorry, I want to make sure.
Your seller, it's okay. Your seller concession is always off of the purchase price, not off of the net to seller. So to calculate what the total purchase price would be on a, for example, $220,000 net to seller, we know we want to offer the seller $220,000. So we want to add our 3% on top of that. Take the number, so in this case, $220,000, divide it by 0.97. Okay? Because 3%, so 100% minus 3% is 97%, right? Divide it by 0.97. That means 226,804 approximately would be the max purchase price that a buyer would be able to do with a 3% seller concession. I always like hard numbers, so it's best to round that. So I would probably round this to 226.5, okay, and write in hard numbers. So I'll show you what that would look like. Does anybody want me to do that math again or explain that? Or does everybody understand that, how I got there? Okay, so.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
The math is the easy part. Why? What do you mean 3% concession? Because I'm
okay. No, that's a good question. So buyers can opt to finance part of their closing costs. And you have to know what loan type they're doing and what loan is allowed or what seller concession is allowed. In an FHA loan right now, buyers are allowed to take a maximum of a 6% seller concession to help towards their closing costs. This can't count towards the down payment, but in a state like New York, where we just learned today that New York is the most expensive state to purchase a home in, our closing costs are the highest in the entire country. It's often because our taxes are so high, really. A lot of people, when they purchase a home, will choose to finance some of their closing costs, so they have to bring less money to the table. So right now, there's certain scenarios where it's more, but typically in a standard 5% down conventional, they can roll up to 3% of the purchase price into their purchase price.
The closing costs into their purchase.
Mm-hmm. They can roll up to a 3% seller concession into the loan to help towards their closing costs. Okay, it's always based off of the purchase price, which is what gets a little confusing. An FHA would be 6%. A VA loan, there is no maximum because they can do 100% financing. A USDA, I think the maximum is 6% as well. And if you ever are confused about how much the buyer is allowed, always talk to their loan officer. They will be able to tell you. So in this scenario, we're saying that Jane and John Doe want to offer a $220,000 net to seller. That's what they want to offer the seller. They want to roll up to 3% of their purchase price into 3% of the loan amount into the purchase price to help with their closing costs. I may have said that backwards, but I've said it enough times. Hopefully everybody understands what I mean. Okay. So that's how we did that math. So we took, because if you want to find out, if we do it backwards, right? Say we knew, because the concession amount is always calculated off of the total purchase price. So 226.5, right? That's our total purchase price. If we multiply that by 0.97, so we're telling the sellers, hey sellers, we're going to offer you 226.5, but we want 3% back at closing to help towards our closing costs. Their net to seller is going to be 97%, right? So 97% of 226.5 is just about 220,000. Okay. So what we're going to do here when we go into our contract is, again, I like using hard numbers because it's always impossible. When you put a percentage amount, it always gets messy and it doesn't look clean. And we want nice, clean, easy to understand contracts. So here we said we're going to round things. So 226.5 which means we're going to change this, right? So 226 minus 5 minus our $2,000 earnest money deposit means that this is going to be 224.5. We're going to jump down here and we're going to say we are asking for a $6,500 seller concession, applicable, off the purchase price. And then to clarify everything, if you have seller concessions, go back up here, paragraph D, that's what this little paragraph line is for, 220,000 net to seller. Okay, so now it's really clear. When a seller sees this, they know exactly what's going on. Buyer's offering 226.5 with a $2,000 deposit, and they see this line D here, but it says, hey, 220 net to seller. Why? Jump down here because they're asking for a $6,500 seller concession. Because you've done the math, you know that's well within their 3% seller concession, and everything is cool. When you're a listing agent and you receive a contract like that, please always check the math, because not every agent knows how to do this correctly. Okay, so when we're representing our sellers, we need to make sure that the buyers are being advised correctly, because that's just good business. And if things seem off, you need to either ask me or ask the buyer's agent about it. Say, hey, I noticed in your math, you have the buyer doing a 5% down conventional, but they're taking a 4% seller concession. Was that intentional? Does their loan allow that? I just want to make sure they have enough cash to close. Okay. Like I said, there are some rare circumstances for qualified buyers where they can do a 5% down with a 6% seller concession, but it is very rare. So just make sure things look like they're on the up and up. All right. The last piece here, what's the mortgage loan amount going to be? The mortgage loan amount is always your total purchase price minus your down payment. So in this case, we're not doing off of 220,000. It doesn't matter what the net to seller is. It's over the total purchase price. This is why the idea of a seller contribution is a misnomer, okay, and why it's very misunderstood. Mm-hmm. The seller's not giving money back at closing. The buyer is financing that money. And your buyers need to understand that too, because if they have a chunk of money to bring to the table, it may be financially better for them to bring that money to the table if the house doesn't need any renovations, or if they have enough money left over for a rainy day fund. They shouldn't be paying interest for 30 years on money that they don't need to use, mm-hmm. or they don't need to finance. Okay, it's just like when you buy a car, you only finance what you need, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with a house. You should only be financing what you need to finance. If they need it, great. Where else are you going to right now, get money at a 4% or 5% interest rate? It's a good interest rate. You might as well if you need it. But if they don't, make sure that they understand that, because there's a lot of television shows right now that perpetuate the idea that the sellers are just reaching into their pocket and handing the buyer money, and that's not what's happening. Think about it. If the seller were going to do that, they'd just lower the purchase price. They wouldn't just hand the buyer money.
Is that other shows on a particular channel?
So again, mortgage loan amount would be your 226.5 times 0.95, because we're running this scenario off of a 5% down conventional. So your mortgage loan amount will now become 215,175. Okay. Does everybody understand how we? Yeah. To get the mortgage amount?
Yeah.
To get the mortgage amount, we're calculating the total purchase price, which is the 226.5. 226.5. And we're using this scenario based off of the idea of a 5% down conventional loan, which means they're doing 5% down. They're bringing 5% of that to closing. So we'd do 0.95 to find out the amount of money that they're financing, which would be 215,175. That would go in this blank here. Okay? Of a mortgage loan amount of 215,175. So that is how you would calculate a purchase price with seller concessions. And I hope that if you get to the point where you're doing that and you don't remember anything, please come talk to me instead of submitting a contract with bad math. Okay? And especially before you present this to your buyers, because we should know what we're doing. And I understand that this is not always the most straightforward thing. There are lots and lots and lots of agents that do this wrong. We should not have that excuse. Okay? So I'm always here if you need, or speak to somebody else who has been doing this longer. There are plenty of people in this room right now and in the company that can help you, but I'm always here if you need it. Okay? I'm going to leave all this stuff in here because we're going to go back through after this is done and explain how this works. By the way, I always say about 6 weeks from what we consider attorney approval. So say attorney approval here, we'll get there later. Say we're going to say attorney approval, though, is on the 19th. 1, 2. Now I lost count. The 3rd. Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So we're writing all this in. All right. Any questions on that page and what goes in there? Everybody's written that in on their cheat sheets. Okay. Any questions, always come talk to me. Paragraph 8. In this paragraph, you can say you want the property broom clean. Another thing to add here, property to be maintained inside and outside until closing. Okay? What does that mean? We're heading into winter right now. Snow removal, leaves,
Raking.
all of the above. They can't have the lawn be 6 feet tall. I had sellers try and do that once. Oh, great, I got a buyer. And they were no longer around. They stopped mowing the lawn. We show up for the final walkthrough, and the lawn is like 2 feet tall. Like, no. Now you're going to have to pay to mow it, and it's going to be a lot more expensive. Okay? Property to be maintained inside and outside until closing. Other things that you can put here, depending on the scenario. Say your buyer's putting 20% down or putting $100,000 down. It might be a good idea to write contingent upon property appraising at or above purchase price as specified in paragraph 5 of this contract. Okay? What does that do? That means, say when the bank sends their appraiser in, we're offering $226,000 or $220,000 depending, and the bank decides it's only worth $200,000. However, that's a bad example. Sorry. If this buyer were putting say they were putting $100,000 down, right? We'll still use the same purchase price. $220,000. They were putting $100,000 down. So that means, but the appraisal comes back and it's only good for $200,000. However, the bank's only financing $120,000. Technically, the bank's not going to deny the loan. They don't care. They don't care that the buyer promised to pay $20,000 more than an appraiser says it's worth. There's nothing protecting the buyer's $100,000. Okay? So if your buyer is putting a significant amount of money down and has no seller concessions, it might be a good idea to put that in the contract. Or if we're worried about appraisal, but the buyer really wants the property and the sellers are really stubborn, right? It might be worth it to put that in the contract so that way if the sellers come up against a bad appraisal, they're like, your buyer A has an out, but B, it's a bit more ammunition to get the seller to lower their price. Because by that point, everybody's got skin in the game and they're going to be much more likely to work with you. What else can you put in there? Contingent upon. This is where you can put the sale of the buyer's residence at 123 Main Street in Cohoes. 2047, right? I think.
Yeah, sounds right.
Okay. And if it's under contract already, you can say which is already under contract, or you can say which is on the market, or you can, if it's not on the market yet, you just put that in there and hope nobody asks questions. Okay. This is paragraph 8 is where you can throw in lots of other things. Be careful what you throw in there. We are not lawyers. We cannot ratify contracts. So you need to be careful what you write in there, but you can write it pretty much anything, and paragraph 8 is the place to put it. Title and survey. Paragraph 9, 40-year abstract of title should always be checked, and this one is going to differ based on county. I don't know if everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. So in Albany County, in Rensselaer County, pretty much most counties east of the Northway. So Albany, Rensselaer, what are the other ones? Saratoga and Saratoga are the main ones that we deal with. Those are all going to be the responsibility and the expense of the purchaser. Okay. West of the Northway, so, and further north, it's going to be the responsibility of the seller. So Schenectady County, it's financial responsibility of the seller. Montgomery County, Schoharie County, and Warren County, I believe, are all seller. The only one I'm not sure on is Montgomery County. Warren County.
You have Montgomery right now.
Do you?
And I think Washington is too.
Washington is seller too. It's been a little while since I've looked at my list. Always ask. Yeah. So mostly it's east of the Northway and Saratoga. Everything else is seller. If you're ever curious, ask. If I'm not available, the best person to ask is your attorney. They're the ones that run title. They're going to know off the top of their head, I promise you. Okay. The attorneys should catch that too if you accidentally make a mistake, but we should not be making mistakes if at all humanly possible because we're wonderful and perfect. Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure. Paragraph 10, conditions affecting title. So what's the property zone for use as? Most of the homes that we sell are going to be a single family residence. What else can go in there? 2-family residence, multi-unit residence. We should only be handling properties 1 to 4 units because that is still considered a residential sale. Anything above that is commercial, and we do not do that yet, maybe. Also in there, condominium. Condominium is different. Okay. Most of the time, though, it's going to be single family residence. Paragraph 11, deed. You can write not applicable. There's really no other type of deed and no other type of deed that we want. Transfer of title. Again, we're running this off of a standard 6-week timeline. So 6 weeks we counted was October 31st. Paragraph 16, this blank. This is the depository bank. Where do I get that information? We go back to the listing, find out where the listing agent's escrow account is held. Trustco. Okay. That's where our escrow account is. Obviously, it's my listing. So Trustco is what would go in that blank. So any questions on that page? That one's kind of easy. Time period of the offer. Hotly contested, what actually goes here. Okay. There are 2 schools of thought. If you want a date by which the seller is required to respond, that's perfectly acceptable. And usually if that's the case, I try and put 24 hours from presentation. So say we're going to present this tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So we can say, we want to give them a little bit of a buffer, right? So we can say 12 p.m. on the 15th. Okay. Some agents and many attorneys believe, and because this is not exactly the most specific paragraph, that this date should be the date by which we have an acceptance, which means you'd have to calculate in how long you think it's going to take to negotiate the offer and get it signed. Okay. The initial offer, most people don't expect their initial offer to be signed, right? So typically, if we're going to be rewriting the offer anyway, this date and time can always change, which is why I usually do within 24 hours of presentation. But if you have a feeling this might be accepted, or you don't want to have to rewrite anything other than the first page of the contract, you write this out, say, through the weekend. And we'll say by 5 p.m. Sorry. 5 p.m. on the 16th. It really depends on your style, and the agent, honestly, on the other side might have words about it. Paragraph 18 is pretty important for us to be filling out because it explains how we get paid. Okay, in this particular instance, Romeo Team Realty is the listing agent, is the buyer's agent and the listing agent. But let's pretend we are offering on a property that's not listed by our company, right? The first blank is always going to be the listing agent's company. So let's say it's coming from Olmsted Real Estate Group. Okay. Olmsted Real Estate Group and Romeo Team Realty. The buyer's agent is always going to be the second blank. Cooperating commission. What goes there? Whatever you're charging is the answer. We typically take a look at what the buyer's agent compensation is in the listing, which is 2.5%. And 2.5% goes in there. You should be checking your listing, ladies and gentlemen. Future gentlemen. All right. This may not always say 2.5%. Per company policy and procedures, you are allowed to accept anything 2% and above. If that buyer's agent compensation is below 2%, you have to come to me and we have to have a discussion as to where the extra money is coming from. We do not accept below 2% without written permission from the broker in this company. Okay? You can always try and negotiate more. I've been successful in certain situations where I've seen that the compensation is 2%, and I write in the offer, we're requiring that, 2.5% be paid to our side. And sometimes with an acceptable offer, the seller's agent and the seller will accept. It is a negotiation. Commission is 100% negotiable in New York State. Okay.
What about some that are like they're really like low priced homes that put a dollar figure?
Depends. I try not to accept below, if it's like a $60,000 home, try not to accept below $1,500. But if that's, again, it really just depends on the situation. If you're ever unsure, just ask. Rentals are obviously different, things like that. But in general, company policy is we always offer 2.5%. If you're not offering 2.5% to your buyer's agent when you have a listing, you need to come talk to me, and you better have a good reason as to why, because no one feels good when they get less than 2.5%, and I don't want to be the company that does that to others. If you want to negotiate your commission as the listing agent, we can talk about that too, but we shouldn't be discounting somebody else's compensation without very, very good reason. Okay. I mean, if it's $1 million home, we can probably talk about it, but I'm assuming we're not going to be there yet. Someday, or it'll be rare. But we can accept up as low as 2%, and you don't have to come to me. Stinks, sucks. Just remember, what goes around comes around for people, and we smile and nod and do our jobs. Okay. But below that, you have to come to me and we have to talk about it. All right, so that's what goes there. 2.5%, never leave anything blank, not applicable for the rest. Okay? Attorney approval should always be 3 business days. Please never write 3 business days. I hate that because then it gets really confusing for most people and it's open to interpretation. So 3 business days from what? From about the time that the seller accepts the contract, right? So if we assume they're going to be negotiating on the 14th, 3 business days would be the 19th, okay? If it's a really hot property, you can shrink it down to 2 days. Just make sure you know who your attorney is and they're not going to hate you. Okay?
It's a really hot property.
So if it's priced really well, we're in a really strong market, there's a lot of activity, there's maybe multiple offers, you might want to shrink that date down to 2 business days so that, and we'll go over this when I go over how to explain this contract. But anything can happen in that attorney approval period. Even if you have a signed accepted agreement between 2 parties, it's not binding until the attorneys approve it. So if the seller were to get a better offer, it's easy for people to back out. So you want to, if it's a really hot property and you think there's going to be a lot of activity, you want to shorten that window as much as humanly possible. But obviously you need to give your attorney enough time to be able to review and approve the contract too. So attorneys, the general rule of thumb is 3 business days. Never shrink it down below 2. unless you've had a conversation with somebody. Say the buyer knows who their attorney is going to be. It's somebody you've worked with before, and you think that, you really want to shrink it down. You could always say, but to your attorney, hey, can I do a 1-day turnaround if we get this signed right away? And if they say yes, go for it. Just remember the seller's attorney could always extend it anyway. So really it should be no less than 2, but general rule of thumb should be 3 business days, because attorneys don't work at nights or on weekends unless they're really cool and there are attorneys, which they do. Okay. Inspection paragraph. Most people don't know who their home inspector is going to be right away, so you just put TBD there. Items excluded from the inspection. This is an important one. Typically, it's none. I'm not excluding anything from the inspection. However, say there's a barn on the property that's in really terrible condition, and the seller's already said, barn's sold as is, I don't care what happens. But barn. Okay. Typically, as a buyer's agent, though, we're going to put none. We're not excluding anything from inspection. Most of the time, you're going to use that strikeout feature to strike out septic and well. However, out in the boonies, most people are going to have septic and wells. What do we do here? Easiest thing to do is check this box here that says obtain mortgage financing. Okay. Or if you have a buyer who knows what they're doing and they have a particular requirement for their flow test, you can always say they want to produce 5 gallons per minute for 2 hours. Okay. Whatever they want, whatever they're requiring. That would be a really pretty good well right there.
Mm-hmm.
But, generally you want to be able to obtain financing. Okay. Dates. So we're assuming attorney approval is happening on the 19th, right? You want to give about 2 weeks for the buyer to perform their inspections. All right. You don't want the buyer to perform the inspections before attorney approval, because why are they going to spend money before the contract's firm and binding, right? So 2 weeks from there, they're going to perform them by the 5th. I usually try and run them to a Friday, and then they're going to notify both brokers and both attorneys by the Monday of any major defects. In this scenario too, since attorney approval is on the 19th, you could always give them till the 3rd to run to a Wednesday, and we'll notify them by Friday of any majors. These dates should not be the same, okay? Because one is the date by which you've performed the inspections, and the other is the date by which you have notified the other party of a failure, okay? So if you perform the inspection, say you're performing the inspection late on the 3rd, you might not get that report back until the 4th or the 5th. You need time to be able to review the report and see if there's a major. So there should always be a couple days in between there. They should not be the same date. Okay? Any questions on that page? Beautiful. Paragraph 22, it's the last page. What goes there? Always the New York State agency disclosure. Always, always, always. There is never a scenario where that disclosure is not going to be required for us. That should always be paragraph A. Done, not an end of story. Second one is usually the property condition disclosure. You may have to abbreviate in some of these. When is the property condition disclosure not required? Who remembers? If it's in a state, there's also one other scenario that's very common to us.
Flip?
Not a flip, not a foreclosure. Well, foreclosures they usually do, but they cross everything out. They may not.
Short sale?
No, close. No.
Condos.
Condo.
Oh.
Condominium does not require a property condition disclosure.
Is there a specific reason for that?
Probably because there's community property. So
Yeah.
the seller wouldn't be able to fill everything out.
Yeah.
Like the roof and the foundation and all that stuff is not the seller's responsibility in a condo. So it makes it null and void, really, or unnecessary. Many condos will still fill out a PCD, a property condition disclosure, but they are not required. So the two big ones are an estate. They're not required. Not a flip, but sometimes a foreclosure or a bank owned, they won't provide one because they've never lived in the property. But typically what they do is they fill one out and just cross everything out. and say sellers had no knowledge or seller has no knowledge, and they write it across. Right.
Unknown.
So, but really an estate and a condo are the two scenarios that you will come across the most that do not require a property condition disclosure. Any property built before 1978 should have a lead-based paint disclosure. You should also always have a carbon monoxide disclosure. Many companies, not ours yet, maybe someday, will have an affiliate company disclosure. That can go in here too. What else might you see? We'll go over these in a minute.
An FHA disclosure
FHA disclosure,
or a USDA disclosure.
USDA or
Or
VA.
VA.
Okay. Those should all go there. If it's a short sale addendum. Often, I've never seen a bank not have a short sale addendum for a short sale. Okay, things like that. Relocation addendum. Any other addenda accompanying the contract should go there. Okay. Then your purchaser, you fill out your name. You are the selling broker when you represent the buyer. I know that's super confusing. The idea behind it is you are the one who's selling the property. You're bringing the buyer, you're selling the property, okay? The listing agent or the seller's agent is the listing broker or the listing agent. Listing or sellers, buyers or selling. Sorry, that's annoying and confusing.
So it's our name, not yours.
Yeah. This would be your name. So we filled out on the other one, Jennifer Yetter. So Jennifer Yetter, you're selling this one. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Nice job.
Good job.
Friday.
All right. So your information would be here. So we'd put all Jen's information here, but in this case, it was mine because this is my template. Tax ID number. Tax ID number. So many agents will have it wrong. If you see a dot something here, they probably did it right. This is my listing, so I know it's right. Okay. So you can copy this number, this whole number here for the tax ID number, and you can paste it here. Okay.
Just the end numbers.
All of them. Yeah. You don't need the beginning part. Just the end numbers. The APN, you don't need that. But that is the tax ID number. Now, say it looked like this in the listing, which I see it all the time. That's likely wrong. Please don't do that. If you don't see a decimal, which sometimes they don't have them, it's rare, but sometimes it's true. Okay? If you don't see a decimal in that first number, double check on the tax record, please. It'll be right here. Okay? That decimal is important. That tax ID number is important. The fact that people get it wrong drives me up a wall. But make sure you have the proper tax number. Okay? Village or town, and this property at Saratoga Springs. And then the full property address. 12866. Okay?
Well, the mailing address, not the property address.
The mailing address. Sometimes they're
The
different.
towns can be different.
Yes. The town can sometimes be different. So this one is usually for tax purposes. This is the taxing entity. This is the mailing entity. Okay? Any questions on how to fill this out? What goes in what blank? Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through this as if you are a buyer and I'm explaining this to you. Imagine all of this is filled out, okay? We can do here, just so it's not confusing. John Doe. Jane Doe. 123 Main Street. Let's do that. They can be from Buffalo. Ta-da. And then we had Amanda. Tell them they're famous.
Are you gonna?
No, he's card. Yeah, different
Are you gonna try
lessons.
and recruit her?
No, I should though. She can stage a property like no other. Holy cow!
Oh no, I meant by her name.
Oh, I should.
I'm still confused, so please don't.
All right, so we're gonna go over this. Now I'm going to present this to you as if I'm presenting this to you as the buyer for signature. Okay. So this is the 4-page contract. This is the meat and potatoes of your offer. I'm going to go through each thing paragraph by paragraph. You need to stop me if you have any questions, okay? Paragraph 1, we're identifying the parties of the contract, so the seller and the purchaser. This is the seller's information. Double check that your names are spelled correctly and your information is correct. Okay. Paragraph 2, we're identifying the property to be sold, which is 36 Hathorn Boulevard in the town of Saratoga Springs in Saratoga County. In describing the lot, we're saying it's as per deed. Whatever's on the deed, that's what we expect the seller to hand over. We don't put, acreage or lot sizes in there because if somebody is wrong, we don't want to accidentally null and void the contract by having the incorrect information in that blank. Okay, so whatever's on the deed, that's what we expect the sellers to hand over. Paragraph 3, items included in the sale. Everything listed here may or may not be in the property, but basically everything attached to the property. If it exists in the property, this is what we're expecting the sellers to hand over. We're also including the range with oven, refrigerator, dishwasher, disposal, microwave, washer, and dryer. We're saying they're as placed in a working condition on closing. As placed means what's in the property is what we expect the sellers to be handing over. They can't go in and switch out Craigslist bargains before closing. All right. The appliances that we saw in the property are what we are assuming the sellers are leaving. They also need to be in working condition on closing. So the sellers are responsible for maintaining the appliances until closing. If anything were to break, they have to fix it. Items excluded in the sale is all personal property. Paragraph 5 explains your purchase price. You're offering the sellers $226,500 with a $2,000 deposit, which means that you're bringing $224,500 to closing. However, we're only doing $220,000 net to seller because that's what you actually want to offer the seller. Because if we jump down here, you're asking for a $6,500 seller contribution, which means you're financing $6,500 of your closing costs into your loan amount, which is why we add the $220,000 net to seller, which is what you're offering the seller, plus your $6,500 seller contribution to get the $226,500. This entire contract is contingent upon you obtaining a conventional loan, not more than $215,175. Where did I get that random number? I took your total purchase price minus your 5% down payment, and that's what goes there. For a term of not more than 30 years at a fixed interest rate not to exceed the prevailing rate of the day. You're promising to formally apply for this loan within 5 business days of the seller sending back a signed accepted contract. You already have a pre-qualification letter, which means you've already spoken to your loan officer, and you've probably handed over some documents. You've already got the process mostly started. So all this means is once the seller accepts your offer, within 5 business days, you're going to get all of that documentation fully into your loan officer. You're going to sit down with them and formally apply for the loan. Your projected mortgage commitment date is October 24th. That's the date by which you have all of your documentation into the bank. Your loan officer has sent everything into underwriting, and underwriting has said, yes, I promise to give you this loan. There might be some minor conditions attached to that, but that's your full mortgage commitment date. Any questions on this page? If not, you can initial right here where it says purchaser's initials. Both of you will initial on this line. Please leave the other blank for the sellers. Page 2, paragraph 7, mortgage expense and recording fees. This is just stating in writing that you understand that when you apply for a loan, there's certain mortgage expenses and recording fees. Basically, you have closing costs. Your loan officer has already estimated those closing costs for you. This is just disclosing to you that you have them. Other terms, we're saying that the property is going to be broom clean, which is industry standard for cleared of all personal possessions and swept clean. We're also asking the sellers to maintain the property inside and out until closing. We are headed into the fall, so if the leaves start falling, we want to make sure they're raking the leaves and not leaving you with a big pile like they did for me when I closed on my house. It's a bank-owned property, so they didn't do anything. Okay? Title and survey in Saratoga County. A 40-year abstract of title is the financial responsibility of the purchaser. Now, the seller is responsible for conveying clear title. All this means is that your attorney is going to order the title search and you're responsible for paying it. That's already been estimated in your closing costs. It's not in addition to anything. Just know that it's coming out of your closing costs. Paragraph 10, conditions affecting title. It's zoned for use as a single-family residence. That's how you promise to use it. Paragraph 11 states the seller's promise to transfer a deed into your name at closing. There's many different types of deeds in New York State. You're going to get the deed that they have. There's really no changing a deed, but typically it will be a warranty deed. Paragraph 12 is for the sellers. It says that, hey, when you sell real property in New York State, you have to pay what's called transfer tax. It's calculated at $4 for every $1,000 of the purchase price, and it is the financial responsibility of the seller. Paragraph 3 explains why your closing costs are so hefty in New York State. It says that taxes, any water, sewer, all that stuff in New York State is paid in advance. So the seller is has definitely already prepaid their taxes for all of the tax year. Okay, so they're promising to pay for all of those taxes owed at a daily prorated amount up until the day of closing. You're going to reimburse the seller at a daily prorated amount from the day of closing through the end of the tax year for everything that they've already prepaid. That's why you end up paying about a half a year's worth of taxes, because taxes are paid in September for the school taxes and January for the property taxes. So you're always paying something. Paragraph 14 says you have the right to any and all inspections. We'll go over that on paragraph 21 on the next page. Paragraph 15 is your projected closing date. Let's talk about the dates in this contract for a second. No date is time is of the essence. All of these are projected and targeted dates. Don't go hiring movers for that date, okay? I want you to think of your closing date like a pregnancy due date, all right? You might go 2 weeks before, you might go 2 weeks after. You never really know. It depends on how things go, okay? The only time you're going to know when your closing date is set is when the bank has issued you a clear to close, and then within 3 to 4 days or a week of that clear to close, you'll be able to schedule the closing. Until then, it's just a projected closing date. You're not held to this date. Any date can be changed. All we need is a letter in writing from both brokers and both attorneys, and we can adjust the dates as needed. As long as everybody's moving forward in a good faith manner to hit these dates, you're going to be fine. Paragraph 16 explains about your deposit, saying that your earnest money deposit, that $2,000, is going to be held at the listing broker's escrow account, which is held at Trustco Bank. That money is your money. It's always the buyer's money. It's still your money until the day of closing, at which point it comes back to you for a reduction of your closing costs. Sorry. If the only time the seller's really entitled to that money is if you decide in 3 weeks, oh, never mind, I'm going to go buy this other house, or oh, I don't want to buy a house, okay? Otherwise, if the attorney disapproves the contract, you get that money back. If there's a major in the inspection, you get that money back. And you can't come to terms on how to resolve it, you can get that money back. If you were to be denied the loan before that mortgage contingency date is up, you get that money back. The only time you don't get that money back is if you break the contract. So it's your collateral to the seller that you're serious about purchasing this property, barring anything that seriously affects your ability to pay. Any questions on that page? That initial at the bottom. Paragraph 17 talks about the time period of the offer. We're giving them until 12 p.m. on September 15th to accept, reject, or counter our offer, or becomes null and void. If they get back to us within that time period, it may take us a little bit longer to negotiate. We'll adjust that date and time once we come to a meeting of the minds. Paragraph 18 explains why you don't have to pay me. In this scenario, Olmsted Real Estate Group and Romeo Team Realty have brought about the sale. The listing agent's company is promising me 2.5% of the purchase price to bring and represent you. It's not an arbitrary number. I get that right from the MLS listing. Whatever they offer, that's what I take. Paragraph 19 is your attorney approval date. This is a standard contract written by attorneys. As a real estate agent, I'm trained to fill this out and fill in the blanks. However, since I'm not a member of the New York State Bar, I have no right to ratify a contract. Only your attorney can do that. So the attorneys get about 3 business days to review and approve the contract. I want you to think of this as your panic button date, okay? If you wake up tomorrow morning and go, what the heck did I do? This is the worst decision I've ever made. I'm never buying this house. What am I thinking? Figure it out by that date and tell your attorney, because it's really easy to get you out of the contract with your deposit money back. Now, if you're unsure, we shouldn't be offering. You should always offer in good faith. The reason I'm telling you this is not so that we offer in bad faith, but the seller can do the same thing. So while there's many different points along the contract where we can do a little dance and celebrate, we never fully celebrate until the closing table, okay? So keep in mind that in theory, if the seller gets another offer between now and attorney approval, It's really easy for them, the attorney, to just reject the contract and they can go on to another offer. Is that the warm and fuzzy thing to do? No. But it does happen and you should be prepared for that. So don't go blasting all over Facebook that you've bought a house until at least that date has passed, but really don't say anything until you close. Okay? Because the attorneys can accept or reject the contract for any reason whatsoever, and they don't need to disclose why. Okay? Paragraph 20 explains the condition of the premises. New York is an as-is state. That means you've seen the property. The sellers aren't responsible for making any substantial changes to the property. They don't even need to bring it up to code. The only time the seller might decide to make any changes to the property is if something comes up in the inspection. And here are the inspections. Imagine that we have these septic and well crossed out, okay? So you have the right to the structural wood destroying organism and radon inspection. If there were a septic and well, you would have the right to those inspections as well. Okay. Now, here's what the contract says. You are promising to move forward regardless of what those inspection results say, unless we find one singular item that costs $1,500 or more to reasonably correct and affects the structural integrity of the home. So this isn't a cosmetic thing. We can't walk through and say, these hardwood floors really need to be refinished. It's going to cost me $5,000 to refinish all the floors, and I want a $5,000 credit. That's a cosmetic thing. It doesn't count, okay? It's got to be roof, foundation, structural, major mechanical, water, sewer, plumbing. If we find a singular item, it's not a cumulative number. You can't add up the inspection report and say it's going to be $10,000 for everything on this report. I want a $10,000 credit. It's got to be one item. If you do, all it does is reopen the contract for negotiation. Because remember, paragraph 20, the sellers aren't required to do anything. Okay, it's an as-is state. However, if you're not happy with the seller's resolution to that issue, if you find a major, you can take your deposit money and you can walk away, and the only thing you're out is the cost of the inspection. Okay, you can also ask the sellers to fix it before closing, or you can ask the sellers for a credit. You can get an estimate and ask the seller for a credit for the cost to do it at closing. The seller can say yes, they can say no, they can offer to split it with you. At that point, it's just a negotiation, and we're all working towards the same goal, which is to try and get you your dream house. Okay? You're promising to perform these inspections by October 3rd, and we'll notify the sellers by October 5th if there are any major defects. If there are, we need to notify both brokers and both attorneys in writing. Any questions? Then initial the bottom again, page 4. There's certain addenda accompanying this contract. We'll go over all those addenda shortly. 23 says any changes to this document must be in writing. 24 says that you've read and reasonably understand this entire agreement. Then we're going to sign on the left-hand side. We'll put your attorney's name and information once you've decided on them, my information, and then we're re-identifying the property by the tax map number and the full property address at the bottom. The sellers will do the same on the right-hand side. Any questions? Yeah. That's how I explain a purchase contract every time. Any questions on what I said? Yeah.
And of course,
It's okay.
on the attorney portion,
Mhm.
you stated to your imaginary clients
Mm-hmm.
that their attorney, up until the date of closing, could cancel the contract for any reason. They don't have to disclose.
Up
Can you
until that
clarify
date,
Up until which day? The 3
the attorney review period.
Okay. So up until then, they can cancel without any explanation.
Correct.
Up until that. So about that
3 business days,
Okay.
unless the attorneys decide to and agree to extend it, which they can. But the attorney can accept or reject the contract for any reason they want. They don't need to disclose why. They just literally need to send a letter that says, I hereby disapprove of this contract. So we're, again, and the reason being, New York State doesn't allow real estate agents to make binding contracts because we're not members of the New York State Bar. We have not been trained to write contracts. That's why we're an attorney state. If you were in Florida, totally different. Real estate agents are allowed to write contracts that closing it's just your real estate agent and the title company. We're an attorney state, so we have an attorney review period. And downstate, still totally different.
Oh, yeah.
They don't even do this downstate. There's a 1-page binder. It states
that's the feelings on that.
yeah,
Dealing
it
with
states
right
the the minor details of the contract, like what they're offering, their down payment, their earnest money deposit, and their projected closing date. Then they go to do inspections. They can renegotiate anything they want after the inspections. Once they renegotiate, then the attorneys handwrite the contract every time. So waste of flipping time. I don't know why they do it.
And it's at least a 3-month process.
Oh, at least. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
My
New York
clients
City's a
love that.
nightmare. But did that answer your question? Okay. After the attorney review period is over, then you have a legally binding contract. People can celebrate. They can tell their family members if they want. I still wouldn't blast it on Facebook because anything can happen.
After the
Amanda's like, that happened to me 3 times.
You're clear to close. We're not moving. But
Literally. Yep. Her sellers refuse to move.
my mortgage broker was like, "What do you mean they're not moving? We're clear to close."
Well,
That's why I always try and explain
That's the
to
sound I
people.
would make if it's
Yeah.
different.
I always try and explain to buyers and sellers. And at some point when you're working with people, you may want to explain to them. In real estate, it is nearly impossible to force either party to perform. It really is. It's because what could they have done? Their options at that point, they could sue the sellers. But it's a long, drawn out legal process. It's a $10,000 retainer for most real estate litigators. And how long are you tied up in court just to try and sue the seller for what? Because they're not moving out of their house? It's not worth your time and money. You might as well just take your deposit, walk away, and go buy another house. Did you guys ever do anything on that? Yeah. But, and same with the seller. The seller can go after the buyer, but if they don't release that deposit, the seller can't ever sell the property. They can't enter into a legally binding contract with another party to purchase their home if they're still holding an escrow deposit for another buyer. So if the seller were to go after the buyer, then they're not selling their house until that litigation is done. So it's almost never worth it for anybody to sue in this business. It's not. You have to, and that's when, as real estate agents, and hopefully you have a good attorney on your side, you help people see through the red fog and help them take a step back and realize you are better off cutting your losses and running. And it sucks and it's awful, but something better is out there. There's a reason. You dodged a bullet. Let's move on. But yep.
This contract is in literally like the perfect smooth scenario. How does it work when you're in that bidding war with the purchase agreement, and does it change any of the scenario?
Once you submit your offer, all negotiation is verbal until you come to an agreement, and then you'll rewrite. There may be cases where you deviate from that, but in general, 99 times out of 100, you're going to submit a purchase offer, and then you're going to negotiate verbally. And if you come to a meeting of the minds, you'll rewrite and resubmit.
What about if there's a multiple offer situation?
Depends on how the listing agent wants to run a multiple offer situation. We could probably have a whole class on multiple offers. And in fact, we're already like at 8:00. So we'll go through the other. This is really the longest one. So any other questions on explaining the purchase contract? Okay, let's go through some of the others. Let's go back through so everybody knows how to find a template, right? Because at this point, I'm not going to go through the templates. If you're doing a new transaction, you just label what it is, and your templates are all in there in that drop-down menu. So I'm just going to pop into my templates so I'm explaining everything. I know I'm explaining everything correctly. Okay. FHA addendum. With an FHA contract, you should have 2 addenda. I didn't print one of them. The one I did print, though, is the FHA addendum. Most of the information is self-explanatory. Buyer's information, buyer's names, seller's name, full property address, okay? The purchase, the price that goes in here, the dollar amount, is the full purchase price. They are getting a 6,000. So in that scenario, we use the 220,000 with a $6,500 seller concession. The price here would be the full purchase price, which was 226,500. Okay, it is not the net to seller because this is FHA saying to somebody, we're disclosing to you that the property must appraise for the full purchase price. If it does not appraise for the full purchase price, we are not giving the buyer our that seller concession, and the buyer has the right to cancel the contract. Okay, because they could be denied the loan. Theoretically, they may not have the money. That's why when you have a seller concession, it's kind of a backdoor way of requiring that the property appraise for the full purchase price, even if it's a conventional loan and it doesn't have this addendum, because it's a conventional loan and a conventional loan wouldn't have it. If the property doesn't appraise for the full purchase price and you have seller's concessions, the bank could say, "Oh, the buyer doesn't have the money to close without the concessions," and they could deny the loan. So the buyer could technically back out under the mortgage contingency. So you don't have to write in the contingent upon appraising at or above the purchase price piece if you have a seller concession. It's kind of a sneaky way to do it. Again, most agents don't understand that either, but I'm letting you know so you don't have to waste your time. This is also why when we represent sellers, we want to be very careful. If there are seller concessions, yes, we might be very positive that the property will appraise for the full purchase price, but you have to explain to your seller, while it's unlikely to become an issue because we're not worried about this property appraising, you do have to understand that it is an added layer of risk, because if it didn't appraise, the buyer could walk away and they could get their deposit and you are out nothing. I mean, you were out, that time that we took you off the market and you don't get anything for your time. Often, if we're worried about appraisal or we have concerns about it, you can have the attorney write in that if the property doesn't appraise, that the buyer will make up the difference. So as long as so basically the attorney will write in during their attorney approval period, the property must appraise for at least the net to seller. If the property doesn't appraise for the net to seller, the buyer, the purchase price, the buyer agrees to bring. The seller will accept no less than the net to seller. They word it however they want to, but okay. So when you explain this, this is just telling buyer, this is disclosing to both buyer and seller that the property must appraise for the full purchase price. Last paragraph is a real estate certification saying that when you, basically everything in all the contracts are true to the best of everybody's knowledge, and you as the real estate agent need to sign that as well. Okay?
Can you say that one more time?
That the real estate certification says that everything written in the contracts is true and valid to the best of our knowledge. So both agents will sign that. Okay? The other one that we often do with an FHA addendum, or an FHA loan rather, is the importance of home inspections. And this one pretty much says it all in plain English. FHA does not warrant the value or the condition of a home. This is FHA's disclosure to the buyer that they are responsible for doing their own home inspection, and that an FHA appraisal does not constitute a home inspection. So this is the buyer disclosing that they choose to have a home inspection performed. If they do not, they should be checking this box, but you should be very wary. We have a form in Drive that we have used before. If the buyer is choosing to waive their home inspection, I want an addendum signed, a company addendum saying that we have advised them that they should be getting a home inspection, but they are choosing against our advice to waive that inspection. That's our CYA paper, because you never know. God forbid something happens and 2 weeks later the buyer comes back and says, "Oh, there's a leak in the roof," or whatever. You didn't want the home inspection. There's nothing I can do. Okay. VA addendum. I'm just going to go into forms now.
Even if they've had a home inspection, is there anything?
If it's already closed, not usually. We would have to prove that the sellers knew about it, which is extremely difficult to do. Dashboard. That's where it is. I think.
And even still, our home inspectors will tell their clients that it's a visual inspection
Mm-hmm.
too. So if there's something hidden in the walls, then.
My brain is a little mushy right now.
See it.
All right. I'm just going to go into forms. Actually, I'm going to go into my test one so I can pull in as many forms as I want. Sorry. All forms. Here we go. Okay. Other forms that we have in our little packets. The VA addendum. Very similar to the FHA addendum. In fact, they pretty much say the exact same thing. The VA addendum is just a little shorter. And literally, again, you fill in the full property information. All it says is the property must appraise, but for the full purchase price, or the VA is not promising to lend the money. Okay.
Do we give them longer periods of time with the VA for dates because they tend to take longer for processing?
VA loan, I wouldn't write out for less than 6 weeks. However, depending on the lender and the loan officer, it's possible to do it in less if they're already fully pre-approved. If they're not pre-approved, they're just pre-qualified. 6 weeks is a much more standard timeline. But if they have an in-house VA underwriter, it also takes a lot quicker. So right now, I think SEFQ, Homestead, and there's probably
Sunmark is really quick on their VA.
Sunmark.
They
Not the
also
library.
pre-approve
They have
too.
in-house people.
Are Sunmark's people in-house?
I don't think so. I think the only ones that have,
Approval up front, which makes the process a lot quicker.
not always.
Mine was
Not my
delayed by a
VA
month.
was. Really?
A month.
It has to, I mean, most lenders will do a full pre-approval. You just have to ask for it. They just need to take the documentation. The only one who doesn't do anything other than a pre-approval is Trustco. Trustco only does a pre-approval.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else will do either a pre-qual or a pre-approval. You just have to know the difference. Pre-approval, I think we went over this with
Yeah,
most
I
people.
know.
Pre-qualification, they just have mostly a verbal. They'll probably run credit. Pre-approval means that all the documentation's actually been verified. So a pre-approval is actually stronger.
I wish every lender just did that right off the bat.
The problem with that is if you are in a market where it's really hot and you have a casual lead that goes out to see one property and they want it, a pre-approval takes time. A pre-qual can happen in 15 minutes over the phone. So if you have a buyer that wants to see one of your properties and you'd rather them pre-qualified,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's better than cold showing somebody a property, but they don't have to get all their documentation, and it's a softer touch.
No,
They have their time in place, but yeah, when you're seriously working with somebody, it is much better for them to get pre-approved.
Do we require that as an agency, a pre-qual or pre-approval before showing people homes?
Officially, yes. Unofficially, it depends on the situation. I mean, if you're in a certain price point, you will probably want to get that pre-qualification at least, just to verify that the buyer is actually able to purchase. You know, I understand. Like when I started out, I just take people to showings, win them over, and then get them pre-qualified. I usually give one showing free, without requiring it, because sometimes people don't like to give up their financial information or anything like that to somebody they just met. So it's it's easier, and again, we're about trust and winning people over, and sometimes you need to do that, but you have to understand that's a calculated risk. You know, you could be taking somebody out that has a bankruptcy 2 years ago and will never get qualified. What other forms are on there? The lead-based paint disclosure. Let's go through that. That's a popular one, actually, to get. There's one for landlords and tenants, and there's one for sellers and buyers. FYI, make sure you got the right one. Sellers, 99 times out of 100, probably 999 times out of 1,000. We'll check no knowledge of lead-based paint and no reports indicating lead-based paint. they must check a box in A and B and initial both. This initial box is for the listing agent. The agent has informed the seller of the seller's obligations. The number of agents that I see that don't initial this as the listing agent because they think the buyer's agent is supposed to do it can't read. Okay, but this should be initialed by the listing agent. The buyers should be initialing C, D, and E. There should be initials on every alphabetical line. Okay, so for C, if there are copies, they should be initialing I. Typically, they're going to be initialing II, which says the seller's provided no reports. They're either going to initial that they're receiving a 10-day opportunity or they're waiving an inspection. Most people will waive. The way I explain this to people is you are more than welcome to go through the house and take paint chips from all over the house. It's built before 1978, so we're automatically assuming that there's going to be lead-based paint somewhere in it because before 1978, we just didn't know any better and we made paint with lead in it. So if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to go take paint chips from everywhere, send them out, spend the $100, wait a few days, get those test results back. However, if it comes back positive, protect your family from lead in your home, and the government are just going to say, don't eat it and paint over it. So it's up to you if you want to spend the money and the time.
Do we have a copy of that anywhere if they ever said, because they're initialing that they received the pamphlet.
Yeah, you can Google it. It's also in Paragon, pretty sure.
It's under the
Just like a
22
link.
listing
I
forms.
send them the
Yeah.
link. You can go to the government's.
Yeah, if you just Google it, protect your family from lead in your home. It's right there.
Okay.
So you send people the link. Okay. What else do we have? Okay, cancellation and release of all parties. This one's pretty much in plain English. This is if a buyer and a seller decide to mutually agree to cancel a contract after it's been through attorney approval. Attorneys may still want you to fill this out after, even if they haven't issued approval, even if the attorney rejected it in approval, they may still want you to fill it out. It's the seller, it's the buyer and seller. The date that the contract was fully executed. So usually it's the date that the seller signed. Okay. Property address, the deposit amount, and then who we're directing it to go to. Again, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the buyer. However, if the buyer has broken the contract, then you write the seller's name and information. Everybody signs. This is directing the listing agent where to release the deposit money. By law and as a rule and as a strict, firm policy, I will not release anything from escrow without an executed copy of this. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. Okay? Or a closing disclosure.
Was that for certain reasons? Liability or?
Liability. That money is not mine. I'm never allowed to do anything with it unless I'm directed by an attorney what to do with it. So this is my direction from an attorney or an execution from both parties to release that money somewhere. What else?
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So
I know what you're going to ask me.
I was representing the buyer. We never handed over the deposit at all. It was a bank loan, like a Gage Realty
Mm-hmm.
property. So my buyer couldn't get financing.
Mm-hmm.
So his attorney got him out of it. I filled this out. There was nothing for number 3. Sent it over to the listing agent for a signature and he just disappeared. So because both parties are supposed to sign it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so I didn't get signature on the other side.
You rep the buyer and the buyer never had a deposit handed over?
Yeah, we never even got that far. Because
If you have a letter,
got through
well,
attorney
the deposit
approval,
was never
really.
handed over.
Right.
So it's You don't need it in that
Okay.
scenario because the deposit was never deposited.
Okay.
It was never cashed.
Okay.
This is really required if the deposit is cashed.
Okay.
Some may still require, like some attorneys like it signed, whether the deposit's been received or not.
Yeah.
Like
This attorney didn't even.
Yeah.
It's an attorney.
As long as there's an attorney letter, an attorney
Yeah.
cancellation,
Okay.
and there's no, if the deposit wasn't cashed,
Okay.
then it's not necessary to have this signed.
Okay.
But if the deposit was received and
Then,
cashed,
yeah.
no one's releasing anything without this.
Okay.
If a listing agent does, that's
Is that what
That's
you
on
thought
them.
I was gonna say?
no. I thought you were going to say, what if they agree to split the deposit?
Why would they do
Oh, why would they do that?
I think so.
they
There's a
should.
certain large big name agent that posted the other day about a scenario that he was bragging about, that with the 875 layoffs that just happened at
Mhm.
Global Foundries,
Yeah.
2 of his properties fell through that were under contract, and he was bragging that he was able to, they were 3 days from closing, and he was able to retain $10,000 for each seller from the earnest money deposit. I know, right? So the buyer loses their job
And then 10
and
grand.
loses their house and then 10 grand.
it? But worse, he's bragging about it.
Right, well, you know, we can have that discussion another time. But so imagine that scenario, right? The buyer has, try and see it from both sides. This is where we need to be really objective, right? If we're representing the buyer, obviously we want every penny of that deposit back because the buyer just had the worst day of their life, right? However, imagine you represent the seller. The seller moved out because we're 3 days before closing. They've probably secured another property that they either need to close on and now they might lose, or they've secured a rental and they're already out moving costs and money. The seller's out financially by a lot. You know, the buyer is likely already waived the mortgage contingency because we're 3 days from closing. So there's nothing protecting that money anymore.
So technically the money.
So the money technically can fully go back to the seller.
Yeah.
In that scenario, the seller and the buyer might agree to split the deposit. It's probably a high priced home.
Yeah.
Based on who it was probably a high priced home. But so 5,000, say it's a $10,000 earnest money, 5,000 going to the seller, 5,000 going to the buyer. It's never a fun situation.
So then in that situation, it's kind of like we're being nice to you, buyer.
We're being nice to you, buyer, or we're being nice to you, seller.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If the mortgage contingency hasn't been satisfied, hasn't been waived,
Then it
that
will.
money will go back to the
Yeah.
buyer because they'll be denied the loan because they don't have a job anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
I had one where she was the only one on the contract. She kept her job, but the boyfriend was buying with her, but he wasn't on the loan. So he wasn't on the contract, but he lost his job. And she said, I can't buy this house anymore. My boyfriend just lost his job. We don't know what we're doing. We may even be moving out of state because he's got to find a job. So the buyer walked away. Technically, we couldn't submit a denial letter because he was never on the loan. And so in that case, the buyer agreed to forfeit some money because the seller had taken the property off the market. They lost market time. So anyway, there are certain scenarios where a buyer and a seller may choose to split that money. You can try and write in here, 1,000. I don't even know if it'll let you. You probably have to do spacebar. Go ahead. 1,000, and then write buyer and seller and try and write it in there. You can hand write it in there at that point because it might be actually cleaner at that point to hand write, or you can write up 2. So say it's a $2,000 deposit, write up one for 1,000, direct it to the seller, sign, write up another one for 1,000, direct it to the buyer, sign. And both of those would constitute the $2,000 deposit. So it just depends on the scenario. As long as it's clear, I don't mind which you do. Okay. These are all, so we have a couple other things we can do. We can go through all the rest of the buyer documents and then do another day on listings and do all the listing paperwork in 2 weeks, or we can power through some other things. I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be, but do we want to end with buyers today? Contract, yeah. Okay. So the only other thing that I'll go over then is if you're going to do an exclusive buyer's agency agreement, I'll go through that really quick. I know you don't have that written up.
Do we have that one printed off?
You don't
That's a
have it.
tricky one.
You don't have that printed off. You know what? Why don't we save that for next time? We can save that for next time. All right. So I'm going to end the screen
Hold on.
recording.
What about carbon monoxide?
Oh, CO2. Thank you. That one's easy.
Question while you're pulling that up.
Mhm.
You gave an example of adding a clause that the property needed to be maintained inside and out prior to closing or up until closing.
Mhm.
So what if you get to a property and you see the rainforest like you did at yours?
Mhm.
What's your
You see it at the final walkthrough.
what happens?
The buyer can refuse to close.
How much does it cost the buyer? Does it cost them money not to close on the date that they're supposed to?
It depends. Is if their rate lock is expiring that day, then yes, it will. If their rate lock doesn't expire, or maybe their lease is up, it depends on the scenario. But the buyer can refuse to close until it's taken care of. If they have to close on that day and time, caveat this again with it's pretty much impossible to force anyone to perform. But what most reasonable people and what most attorneys will do is get a quote real quick for the cost to have somebody do the lawn and have the sellers credit the buyer at closing. And that's usually what happens for walkthrough issues is somebody will try and credit, the seller will credit the buyer or vice versa. They'll work something out. It's at that point, it's really the attorneys that need to work it out. And they'll sit there and maybe argue back and forth at the closing table for a little bit, but they'll figure something out. Or the buyers or sellers. I had one once where the buyers did a 2-hour final walkthrough and decided to nitpick everything that they didn't like from back in the inspection. And my sellers were so fed up, they gave them like $150 and said, take it or leave it, but we got to close on our next house. Again, people can do almost whatever they want. Is it right and fair? No, but the world's not always right and fair. So the carbon monoxide disclosure is kind of written in plain English, and that's usually what I tell people is this disclosure is written in plain English. But basically what it says is that sellers are responsible for having adequate carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in the home, even if they are for sale by owner. If they don't sign this as part of the listing, somebody will make them sign it at closing. The buyer's inspector will typically check to make sure that there's adequate carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in the house. They do not have to be hardwired in. So if they're missing, the seller can literally go to Home Depot and buy a $20 smoke detector and stick it in the home on the counter. It doesn't matter. But so it's just requiring that those things be in there.
Is this applicable to bank-owned properties in the States?
Theoretically, but bank-owned properties are going to say, sold as is, we're not doing anything. But most bank-owned will have them anyway.
Do you have buyers sign on these prior to the offer?
So what buyers are going to sign prior to their offer is going to be what the listing agent has listed.
So all these disclosures are uploaded.
All these disclosures should be uploaded in Paragon for most listings, except for the FHA and the VA disclosures. Those are obviously on the buyer to provide depending on their financing.
So do you send these all via DocuSign if you're talking to the buyers over the phone, or do you go and meet with them and have you sign these?
If they're a first-time home buyer or it's the first time that I'm going through a purchase contract with anybody, I will usually type all these up, print them, and go sit in person and have this conversation. However, in this day and age, our time is limited. Not just mine, but the buyers often have families too. And we're seeing houses in the evenings, they've got kids that they need to go put to bed. So often what I'll do is we'll break from the showing. I'll go right up the offer at home. I will discuss a time usually after we both put our kids to bed. So like I usually 8:30 is usually my time. I can usually guarantee that I'm available by 8:30. And we'll have a phone conference. I'll send it to them via DocuSign, but then we will go over everything that I just said when going over the contract. I'll do that just over the phone, and I'll have them look at it on their computer or on their phones as we're talking. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. So next time we're going to end the recording for now. This will be uploaded to Google Drive. Thanks for joining. Take care.